Richey Edwards was the wordsmith, the poet of his generation. He was obsessed with having the last word, and he left no note. The Manic Street Preachers overnight became the favourite band of every messed up kid in the world because it was like, oh my god, he gets it. Richey had some kind of dangerous ideas. And I don't just mean dangerous for him, but I mean dangerous for his fan base. I think if Richey had have been a celebrity of the modern era, he would have probably been cancelled, honestly. If you were an alternative teenager in the 90s, this was such a seminal discussion to have with your friends, was like, what do you think about Richey? So hello, you wonderful human of the internet, and welcome to a video that was recently requested by one of you guys on Instagram relating to the Manic Street Preachers and the disappearance of their lyricist and guitarist Richey Edwards, which has still never been solved to this day. And this happened in 1995. To this day, we still don't know, is he alive? Is he dead? If so, how did he die? If he's alive, where is he? If you were an alternative teenager in the 90s, this was such a seminal discussion to have with your friends, was like, what do you think about Richey? Do you think he's alive? Do you think he's dead? What's your theory? And I remember having this discussion so many times with so many people, and it's kind of wild and amazing to me that since I've mentioned the Manics and stuff on Instagram and played some of their music in reels, it turns out that there's a lot of people who only just learning that actually he disappeared all these years ago and we still don't know what happened. So I've sent so many people off down this rabbit hole of like, oh my God, this is so weird though. Like, have you heard this bit of evidence? Have you heard this conspiracy theory? And I got so sucked into it. I was like, look, I'm just going to make a video because I still find this fascinating. And I still think the Manics are one of the most amazing bands that have ever been out there, particularly because of Richey's influence and his lyrics. They wrote about stuff that actually mattered. Their subject matters were dark and varied. They liked to throw in politics with sex. They touched on the Holocaust, human trafficking, racism, anorexia, mental illness, self-harm, capital punishment, all of these really dark subject matters that actually really matter in the world today were the stuff that they like to sing about. And Richey and Nikki, their two lyricists, they basically had a very interesting setup in the band in that there were two teams. In their four-person band, they had two teams. They had Richey and Nikki who would write the lyrics, and they always wrote the lyrics first, which I think is the way to write a good song, personally. I think the words, I mean, just because I'm a word obsessive, really, but I think you should start with the words. You should write this poem that sounds amazing. So they would. And then they would hand it over to the singer and the drummer, who were the musical team, and they would have to somehow wrangle this furious, bizarre Molotov cocktail of words into music. And the lead singer, James Dean Bradfield, is an absolute musical genius. Like, his vocals have developed so much over the course of their career. He's so good now. But the complexity of Richey's lyrics that he would have to spit while also playing incredibly complex lead guitar melodies, absolutely amazing. The guy's a musical genius, particularly considering the fact that Richey was not a musician. In the first couple of albums, to be honest, I don't know if Richey is actually recorded playing on any of the albums because he couldn't play guitar in the first place, and by the time he'd learned to play guitar by about the third album, his substance abuse problems were so bad that he didn't contribute anything of worth during the studio sessions. So I don't think Richey playing guitar, although it's mentioned in the albums, I don't think he's actually on the albums playing guitar. And for a lot of their earlier gigs, his guitar was not plugged in because he was just not a musician. Richey was the driving force behind the band in many ways. He was the mouthpiece of the band in interviews. He would tell them, like, this is going to be the theme of the album. This is what we're all going to wear in the album brochure. This is our stylistics for this album, blah, 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 blah. But he was the director of the band, the mouthpiece of the band, but he wasn't a musician at all, which I thought was just kind of an interesting tidbit of information while we're catching up on the Manics as a whole and Richey in general, and then we will get to the Disappearance stuff. So this is going to be a bit of a podcasty word vomit of a video. I hope that's okay. So basically the history of the Manics, a lot of them had been friends since childhood. The drummer and the lead singer are actually cousins, but they all really came together at university, and this was when they formed the band, that they were all kind of a group of outsiders in this small Welsh mining town. The culture of being a man in this town was very aggressively masculine, that you went down the pub every night, you were all about sex and beer and football, and this was what you were about, and there was no other way to really be a guy in this town. And so for these kind of like androgynous, political, philosophical, deep thinking guys who weren't into that stuff, they were real outsiders in their town, and I think just the frustration drove them crazy. They've got a wonderful quote about the world in this era not being a poverty of money in many places, but it's a poverty of ideas. It's the boredom that drives everyone crazy. And that seemed to be how it went for them. So they decided they were going to form this band that was all about politics and all about stuff that mattered. And they wanted to say everything that mattered to them in one album. This one album, they said, was going to come out. It was going to sell millions worldwide. And then they were just going to break up. They were just going to burn their legacy completely. This was the idea they came out with. So that they came out shooting with all these bizarre ideas. Their first album, Generation Terrorists, is probably my favourite to this day, because their later albums with Richey got very, very dark. And if you were a teenager in that kind of era and you had your dark teenage years to those albums, it's very hard to still listen to them today because of the memories that they bring back. But that first album, Generation Terrorist, which admittedly is an album title that has not aged well in the modern era, but it has such absolutely gorgeous lyrics. It has this vibe of self-destruction set to this really euphoric soundtrack, and it's a very bizarre but fantastic soundtrack. Just to give you some of the lyrics I really, really love, you've got stuff like, Europe freed by McDonald's and Levi's. Can't afford it, so I hate it all. Culture sucks down words. Itemize loathing and feed yourself smiles. Under neon loneliness, motorcycle emptiness. Jam your brain with broken heroes. Love your masks and adore your failure. We're a mess of eyeliner and spray paint. DIY destruction on Channel Chic. The one that's just got this chorus that is pay for it, you're going to pay for my intelligence. They were so proud of their intellect, which I think is like the coolest fucking thing, coming out of a generation where it was like hair metal and it was cock rock and it was all about kind of being dumb and fucking everything that moved. And then you've got this band that takes pretty much the same sound, a lot of the same stylistics, but they throw into it this androgyny and this obsession with politics and intellectualism, and it was like an intoxicating fucking mixture. But I think the event that really made the Manics into a serious band is actually quite unfortunate and quite dark. And I'm not even talking the disappearance of Richey Edwards. This is a long time before this. And what I'm talking about is the For Real incident. This may mean nothing to you if you're not a Manics fan, so trigger warning for self-harm talk. Following the release of their first album, they had an interview with the NME, a DJ called Steve Lamacq, who would get a lot of hate mail in the years and decades that followed from Manic Street Preachers fans due to this interview and this incident. Basically, Steve Lamacq was very suspicious of the Manic Street Preachers and how legitimate they were as a band, particularly in all these weird things that they were saying in songs, that I guess, in today's language, you would describe them as woke. I mean, I guess that's the word you would use, that no one really gave a shit about a lot of political issues in those days in music. And suddenly the Manics were lumping them all into songs and professing to be these kind of intellectual gods who actually wanted to talk about things that mattered. Steve Lamacq, however, said something along the lines of, I think you're just in it for the money. I think you're just another fucking basic band trying to get famous and rich and get a lot of pussy and a lot of money. And I think you will say anything that you think is controversial. I don't think you're for real. And anyway, the interview kind of wound down and he said, look, you know, agree to disagree. I don't think you're for real, but whatever. At this point, Richey said, just come backstage with me for a minute. There's one more thing I want to say to you. So Steve goes backstage with Richey and, you know, he's still saying this stuff like, you know, no offense, but I just really don't think you and your band are for real. At this point, Richey pulls from his pocket or produces from somewhere. No one quite knows where he got it, but he pulls a razor blade out. And because of the fact no one knows where he got it, it makes you wonder, was he planning to pull this stunt at some point? Or that's what it makes me wonder anyway. Like, I understand being a self-harmer of that era, you did tend to carry these things around with you. But equally, I think there was a little bit of premeditation in this act with Richey. That's just my take. But anyway, as Steve Lamacq is standing there, Richey pulls out this razor blade and he carves into the flesh of his forearm for real, quite deeply. And then he just stands there talking to Steve Lamacq for a while, bleeding on the carpet, you know, drip, drip, drip. And eventually they come and get pictures and someone's bandaged Richey up by now, but he, without anyone even asking, he takes the bandages off for the picture. So I will give you the censored picture. The real picture is online everywhere, but I'm not going to put it in this video because it is gruesome. But this is Richey just after the for real incident, and you can kind of see this dark little smile playing around his lips. His eyes are kind of sparkling with glee. You can see he knows he has just made a political move that is going to go down in fucking history. And on the B-side of one of their songs, they've actually got, I believe it's a recording of what went down in the NME offices after the For Real incident. And basically you've got all these different journalists being like, oh my God, do you think he planned this? Like, you know, this is this is gruesome. Can we even print this picture? This guy is, he's childish, he's sick in the head. What are we supposed to do? What are we, you know, and other DJs are saying, look, you know, we've got to print whatever goes on. You know, we printed it with Sid Vicious when he self-harmed, you print whatever's going on. If this nutter goes and sets himself on fire in the middle of the, you know, Times Square to make a point, then we are going to print that picture too. This was kind of the attitude of the NME, but it's interesting actually, just, you know, they really didn't see it as, okay, wow, this guy must have been whipped up into a fucking tizzy by what we were saying. This guy has got mental damage, and what we were saying got to him that much that he is willing to be scarred for life to make the point that, yes, I mean what I fucking say. Do not call me a poser. There was, you know, it was literally just this guy. Oh my God, this fucking guy. This is such a childish stunt. That was the kind of thing they were talking about, because self-harm was not known about in this era, apart from in the cases of Iggy Pop and Sid Vicious, and like doing it as like a stage piece, almost like an art performance on stage. This was the world's only real knowledge of self-harm at that time. But anyway, obviously following this very, very public incident, and after it happened, Richey was wheeled off to hospital and it took about 18 stitches to put his arm back together again. But after this, the focus was constantly on his fragility and constantly on his mental state, and it almost overshadowed the band as a whole. That people wanted to know about his self-harming, why he did it, what it was about, and Richey had some kind of dangerous ideas when it came to self-harming. And I don't just mean dangerous for him, but I mean dangerous for his fan base. I think if Richey had have been a celebrity of the modern era, he would have probably been cancelled, honestly, because he had this tendency to defend his self-harming and his mental issues in such intelligent ways that they tended to come out sounding almost like positive traits. So to give you an example, one time Richey was asked about his self-harming and why he did it. Basically, he said, I grew up in this working class mining town, and the men around me, when they get angry, they get drunk, they get into fights, they beat their wives, they kick their dogs, they shout at their children, they take it out on everyone around them because that's masculine, it's aggression, it's what you do. I don't do that. I only ever take anything out on myself. That is my right, and I have no right to take anything out on anyone else. So if I'm in a bad mood, if I'm in a shit mood, I take it out on myself. And he would talk about the way that the pain kind of focused him up and made him feel better because all the petty little niggles of his life would go away when he was focusing on the pain. Later on in their career, they had a song called Faster, which I don't know whether this is a fact or not, but it is assumed Richey was talking about his self-harming in these lyrics. And basically he says, I am an architect, they call me a butcher. I am a pioneer, they call me primitive. I am purity, they call me perverted. So he had a very, basically he felt that his self-harming was more evolved than someone who takes out their aggression on someone else. And I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm just brainwashed because this is kind of the logic that got me into self-harming, was reading Richey's interviews and getting curious. So maybe I'm just brainwashed, but I kind of agree with him that it's like, yeah, you have no right to beat on someone else because you're having a shit day. Ideally you don't go and do anything awful to yourself either. But if you have to do something dysfunctional, it's far better to do something dysfunctional to yourself than to someone innocent and blameless. So I kind of see where he's coming from, but I do think at the same time, this kind of perpetual spouting off about this stuff would get him cancelled in the modern era. So anyway, this all really blew them up in terms of messed up kids of this generation. The Manic Street Preachers overnight became the favourite band of every messed up kid in the world because it was like, oh my God, he gets it. He gets what it is like to be alone and fucked up and weird. And as their musical career went on, their next album, Gold Against the Soul, was not so critically acclaimed as the first one, and I can see why. It's a shorter album. It's quite sort of despairing, but it's got some gorgeous lyrics. He's got one about his self-harming called Roses in the Hospital. Stub cigarettes out on my arm. Roses in the hospital, want to feel something of value. Nothing really makes me happy. Heroin is just too trendy. So the Gold Against the Soul album, it has its moments of kind of political stuff, but it seems to be this slither into depression. And you get the feeling that Richey is not really okay on this album, but it doesn't come out in the most explosive way. It comes out in this very monotonous, flat, depressed sort of way. And the album, as I say, it's critically acclaimed retrospectively, but when it first came out, people were not desperately impressed with it. However, they followed this up with their third album, which is where things get really interesting. The third album was entitled The Holy Bible because Richey felt this is the ultimate truth. This is our ultimate truth. We are telling the truth. It's the Bible. And even just telling you that bit, you can kind of get the feeling, okay, this guy is falling off his rocker a little bit. In my eyes, I felt like you can see the slither from kind of youthful exuberance and being a bit fucked up, but having dreams in their first album, to the second album, depression. The third album, Richey has got so twisted up about his intellect and the problems in the world and everything that is dark. And he's thrown himself into so much dark subject matter, this obsession with the Holocaust and with anorexia and with all these things. He's gone completely psychotic. There was a lot of backlash from them calling it the Holy Bible, obviously. And the lyrics on this one are really quite dark. The soundtrack is about the heaviest, darkest thing they put together. James Dean Bradfield did an amazing job putting a score to Richey's lyrics. They used a lot of samples from documentaries and things like this, a lot of weird overlaid samples. And the Holy Bible is like a scary album for me to listen to these days because it has such scary memories attached to it. You've got some bits that talk about Richey's kind of decline, things like I eat and I dress and I wash and I can still say thank you. Puking, shaking, sinking, I still stand for old ladies. Can't shout, can't scream, hurt myself to get pain out. And then there's just like crazy obsession about serial killers, the Holocaust, death, generally capital punishment. If hospitals cure, then prisons must bring their pain. Don't be ashamed to slaughter. The centre of humanity is cruelty. Wherever you go, I will be carcass. Whatever you see will be rotting flesh. Humanity recovered glittering etiquette, answers her crimes with mausoleum rent. And then the faster track about self-harm and how he feels that it's architectural, it's pioneering, it's pure. While other people call him a butcher, they call him primitive, they call him perverted. And him following this up by saying, I am stronger than Mensa, Miller and Mailer. I spat out Plath and Pinter. I am all the things that you regret, a truth that washes, that learnt how to spell. I know I believe in nothing, but it is my nothing. I think that's a fucking beautiful quote, and I used to have that spray painted on a t-shirt along with the words scarred, failed, useless. I know I believe in nothing, but it is my nothing. That t-shirt miraculously disappeared. My mum clearly found it too depressing and threw it in the fucking bin. That used to happen to quite a lot of my self-made clothes, unfortunately. So the Holy Bible, everything was getting darker and darker. Richey was falling into substance abuse, drinking heavily. He'd also become anorexic. It's ironic because there is a track called 4 Stone 7 Pounds on the Holy Bible, which is about anorexia. Nikki, the other lyricist, believed it was a piss take track. And it sounds like a serious song until you hear the last line. And the last line is, I've finally come to understand life through staring blankly at my navel. And at that point you can tell, like, a lot of people don't realize this, but it's a piss take song. You know, it's about, oh my God, this is so shallow and this is so vain and so pointless. You've just been standing in the mirror staring at your belly button trying to understand the world. What the fuck? Get out the door, you know, understand things. Or at least I think that's what Nikki thought the track was about and was trying to write. But he could also see that his best friend was genuinely becoming anorexic. So although they were trying to write this piss take song, it was kind of deeply awkward because one of them actually has this disorder. So Richey's weight plummeted and he was really losing the plot. He was self-harming more and more. He was talking about doing things like smashing his hands up with a hammer so that he wouldn't have to play on stage. He hated, at this point, going on stage at all. He wanted for a while to become a silent partner in the band, to just write the lyrics, maybe do the occasional interview, but not go on stage anymore. And they had the tour looming. Obviously, they dropped the album. It was time for the Holy Bible tour. And this seemed to be the thing that in part prompted Richey's disappearance. Now, in the weeks and months that led up to his disappearance, he had been hospitalised at the Priory in London because of the anorexia, the self-harm, the substance abuse, the declining mental state, all of it. They put him in the Priory. Everyone assumes the Priory is the best of the best. It's, you know, where rock stars go. It's where everyone rich goes. But it really didn't seem to be the right place for Richey. He came out of it, from everything the band say, he did not really seem improved at all. I mean, you can see in pictures he doesn't seem to have really regained much weight. He went everywhere with love and hate written on his knuckles. He was spewing all of these self-help quotes that just, he seemed kind of brainwashed and a bit weird when he came out of the Priory. He was carrying cuddly toys around with him everywhere. He seemed to be regressing more and more into this kind of shell-shocked, childlike state. The last photos that were properly taken of Richey before his disappearance are equally kind of disturbing. He shaved off all his hair. He had gorgeous hair, but he'd shaved it all off. He looks just gaunt, pale, shell-shocked. And he's wearing these striped pajamas that almost resemble the pajamas Holocaust victims were put in concentration camps. These days, again, would Richey have gotten cancelled for these photos? It's not exactly in the best taste. But I don't know whether it was some kind of cry for help or what it was. But, you know, he had like a photographer, an interviewer around to his house, and he chooses to be there with a shaven head and striped concentration camp pajamas. It's a bit, you know, the guy is clearly not okay, you know. So anyway, when it came to his disappearance, it was the 1st of February 1995, and it was noticed that Richey was suddenly AWOL because he had been due to fly out with the singer James Dean Bradfield to America to start the Holy Bible tour, and he never showed up for that flight. So obviously they look for him, they can't find him anywhere. When enough time has gone by that they can start a missing persons report, they do this, they get everyone looking, and the first supposed sighting of Richey was on the 7th of February. It's not, I don't think, confirmed that it was Richey, but basically a taxi driver on the 7th February, so he'd been missing for 7 days at this point. This taxi driver had a passenger who fitted Richey's description and who spoke in a Cockney accent. But this Cockney accent, it kept slipping into a Welsh accent, which I'm not even going to attempt. It kept slipping into a Welsh accent. So this guy who looks like Richey is putting on this Cockney accent, but his Welsh accent keeps slipping through. And as they're driving around, this mysterious and slightly odd passenger keeps asking if he can lie down in the back of the car. So it's like he's hiding in the back of the taxi. And eventually he asks to be taken to a train station, and he gets on the train and goes somewhere. Now, the next major discovery that was made was on the 14th of February. So another 7 days after he's been missing. He's been gone for like 2 weeks now. And they find his car on the Severn Bridge, which is a bridge that connects England and Wales, I believe in the south of Wales. And his car looked as though it had been lived in, which obviously would have made sense if he'd been living in it for at least 7 days before this supposed taxi ride that may have happened or may not have done. So his car, it had been lived in and it was left there. It is worth stating at this point that the Severn Bridge is well known for suicides. It is an infamous suicide bridge. A lot of people have jumped to their death from that bridge. So that's not really a very good sign when you find someone who's missing and who's been missing for a fortnight, their car suddenly turns up on this suicide bridge. However, there was no note. The only thing that was close to a note was a little scribble saying, "I love you," which Richey had left, I can't remember, in his hotel or in his car or something. He'd left it for his kind of on-again, off-again girlfriend. That was the closest thing there was to a note. As they delve deeper into his bank statements and his finances, trying to see like, okay, has he extracted cash anywhere around the country? Can we trace him somehow? They realised he had been withdrawing £200 a day, which was back then, I believe, the maximum you could take out per day on a debit card. So he'd been taking out the maximum he could from his debit card for weeks before he disappeared. So at this point, the money he'd extracted totaled £2,800, which back then was a pretty decent amount of money. It's going to get you someplace. You're going to be able to travel pretty far on that. However, obviously, we don't know whether he was saving this money up for the American tour. You know, obviously, if you are going to go and tour somewhere, you're going to need to get cash out. You're going to need to change it into dollars. You're going to need to do all that stuff. He did have a history of drinking and substance abuse, so he could have just been dreading the tour and going, you know what, I'm just going to get fucking wasted for as long as I can and ignore this fucking thing until it creeps up and hits me in the face. So there are a lot of possibilities with this money, but you know, it could have been on the run money. And that is the point at which the trail goes cold. We know nothing more that is concrete evidence about Richey and his disappearance. He was in the winds at this point, and there has never been a confirmed sighting of him alive or dead since. There have been theoretical sightings that have been unconfirmed in Goa, in Lanzarote, in Israel, in all sorts of places. People say, oh yeah, I've seen Richey, but it has never been confirmed. It's all theories. Back when I was a teenager, I was convinced he was still alive. There was no fucking way Richey had killed himself in my eyes as a teenager, because of the fact there was no note. Richey Edwards was the wordsmith, the poet of his generation. He was obsessed with having the last word, and he left no note. I'm sorry, no, he wouldn't kill himself and leave no note. That was what I used to think as a teenager, because genuinely his words, you know, the fact that they'd wanted to say everything that was worth saying in one album and split up, the fact that he couldn't agree to disagree with Steve Lamacq, he had to take him into a back room and slice his arm up to have the last word in a discussion. He was obsessed with setting the world to rights and saying his piece. There was no fucking way in my mind that he would leave this earth and not say everything he needed to say. However, that was what I believed as a young Spitfire 15-year-old. These days, I'm 37. I should point out that Richey Edwards was 27 at the point of his disappearance, making him about the most interesting member of the 27 Club in my eyes. But now that I'm 37, I have come to realise there are a lot of reasons to take your own life without leaving a note. You always plan to set all your affairs in order, you know, and leave all the things that you love to your best friends and get someone to clean up your porn and your weed and all of that and stop your parents finding anything dodgy. You always have these plans to set shit in order before you take your life. But the fact is, people take their lives when they are so low they can't handle going on for another second. And when you're in that position, do you have it in you to write this eloquent goodbye to even your mom, let alone trying to say goodbye to the whole wide world, trying to top everything that you've ever written before and say this final goodbye to the whole world that's perfect? And Richey was a perfectionist about his words. And I feel, did he just think, you know what, I can't make words that are going to be good enough, or I just don't have the energy, I just don't care anymore, I give up? Because that's often how it feels when it comes to the point of taking your own life. Suicide without a note, it happens. And I could see very well why it would happen. So I don't believe that logic anymore. The other thing I should point out regarding, he can't be dead because where's the body? The body would have turned up by now. They looked in the river. It's been over 25 years. His body still hasn't shown up yet. So obviously he never threw himself off the Severn Bridge, because this is another piece of logic that people who think he's alive will bring a lot of the time. And the unfortunate fact is that the currents in the Severn River are incredibly strong. A lot of people are known to have jumped from the Severn Bridge and their bodies have never been found, or they've been found like so many miles upstream or downstream, however it works. Bodies can be washed right out to sea in the Severn River. So the fact that Richey's body has not been found does not mean that it's not in there. That's quite gruesome, but it's true. Honestly, this whole amazing, mysterious disappearance that he's pulled off for over 25 years, it could have literally been a pure accident, in that he just jumped from the Severn Bridge, expected his body to be found, expected that their band would become this kind of tragic, eternal thing on par with Nirvana, bearing in mind Kurt Cobain had taken his life only a year before. He may have expected it to go down like that, and then the currents in the river just blew his body out to sea, and it's become this huge mystery instead. Now, Richey was officially declared dead in 2008, I believe, because after a certain period of someone being missing, you can have them declared dead, because it just makes everything easier for the family in terms of splitting their money and their possessions and all the stuff like that. I think something really honourable that's worth mentioning about the Manics is that even after Richey went missing, and I think even after he was confirmed dead, they continued putting a quarter of their profits into an account for Richey in case he ever came back, or for his family. I think that's really sweet. The other kind of weird conspiracy thing to mention is the Millennium. If you were not a Manic Street Preachers fan at the time of the Millennium, you will not remember the absolute hysteria that went on regarding the disappearance of Richey, because the Manics did play a huge gig on the Millennium that was streamed live around the UK. All of us were absolutely glued to the TV. And dude, we had this massive conspiracy that Richey was going to reappear on the night of the Millennium. He'd only been missing for 5 years at this point, bear in mind, which is a long freaking time, but it's not that long. You know, he only would have been in his early 30s. And we didn't think the band were lying. We could see the band were distraught by losing their best friend and not knowing what had happened to him. But we really thought Richey, being this absolute brain box, this absolute genius who wanted his band to be this monumental, classic, unforgettable, mysterious moment in time, we really had this theory, you know, all of us chatting away on these early internet forums. We had this theory that he had fucking disappeared. He'd managed to stay hidden for 5 years, but now it was the Millennium and they had their biggest gig that they'd ever played. He was going to come back. You know, like Jesus rising from the dead, it was going to be crazy. Like, if you are too young to remember the Millennium, I don't think I can ever explain to you how much of a fucking big deal it was. Like, the crazy stuff people believed in, like the Millennium bug. We thought planes were going to fall out of the sky, nukes were going to get launched. You know, people had crazy conspiracies about the Millennium, and it was literally the party of 1,000 years. I mean, I fucking hated the Millennium because I was 14 years old and I was just that bit too young to go out and party on the Millennium. So after watching the Manics gig, I didn't even stay up till midnight. I was awake at midnight, but I was in my fucking bed sulking because I was like, I am not spending the night of the biggest party in the world with my freaking mother. You know, like, everyone else is out there like doing drugs and getting wild, and I'm here with my mom. Fuck you, I'd rather be in bed sulking. So that was my Millennium. But before that, the Manic Street Preachers were playing their Millennium gig, and we were all glued to the TV waiting to see, okay, Richey's going to walk on stage at any moment, isn't he? And are the band in on it? Do they know? Like, has he told them tonight that he's coming back? Or are they going to be as shocked as anyone else? And I mean, these days I feel awful about these conspiracies because it must have torn the band to pieces. You know, they must have caught wind of these conspiracies back then. You know, even before having Twitter and stuff where all this stuff is going to be trending and it's going to be unavoidable, all of these whispers must have reached the band, and it must have been galling for them having all these kind of idiot teenagers going, oh, the Millennium, you know, Richey's going to turn back up on the Millennium, and, you know, them knowing like his issues run far deeper than that. I don't think this is going to happen, but there must have been like a little spark, I feel like, for them too, having all these people believing it. There must have been a little bit of them wondering, like, is this going to be the thing that makes him walk back in, though? Like, I don't know, but obviously, no, you know, the Millennium gig passed by, he didn't turn up, and that was that. So my theory on the whole, is he dead, is he alive thing these days, honestly, I don't know whether he died from suicide at the time. I don't know that. I have this feeling that maybe he didn't. Maybe he did actually disappear and he did try to go on the run. But the trouble with going on the run is that you can't get away from who you are as a person. You can't get away from your own mental health issues. And Richey was clearly spiraling hugely. And yeah, maybe a lot of that had to do with the pressures of fame, the pressures of touring, all of this. And, you know, he'd said in a lot of interviews that really he just wanted to go and live by the coast and have dogs and have a happy, chilled out life. And I think maybe he did go off and look for that. But I don't know that he ever would have been mentally stable enough to cut his entire support network, all his friends, out of his life. And he's on the run now. So how's he going to get decent mental health treatment? How's he going to get anyone looking after him? The one and only quote he ever said in an interview about suicide was that the S word had never crossed his mind. He says, I'm not a strong person, I'm a weak person, but I can handle pain. So he obviously felt that suicide was not something that he would do. It was not for him. But of course, there are other ways to die young when you're a bit messed up. You know, he did have drinking problems, substance abuse problems. You know, you can die from alcohol poisoning. You can die from an accidental overdose. He was dealing with anorexia. That can kill you too. Self-harming, you can go wrong with that too. I just feel the guy was not cut out for a very long life. And I think with all the pressures of going on the run and having the whole world looking for you and feeling like a hunted rabbit, I don't think that's going to do you much good either. So my rather dark theories these days are either that he went missing, he did go on the run, and eventually he just had to face the fact that his problems were not in the UK. They were not surrounding the band. His problems were innate, and the only way out maybe was something awful. So I feel for him to be in his 50s somewhere and to have gone completely undiscovered all this time seems very fucking unlikely to me. I don't think he is alive at this point. So my other theory is the very basic one of he jumped off the bridge and his body was washed out to sea, and we've all been puzzling over a mystery that is not a mystery, but it is just a weird turn in weather. That's my other theory. I think it's very unlikely, unfortunately, that he is still alive and out there. But I would love to, because I feel like Richey had so much to give the world. I feel like if he had have gone on the run, he would have had to do something to stay creative, productive, and, anything close to happy. So I feel like Richey would have started writing poetry, or he would have started writing books, and eventually he would have wanted to publish them. And I don't know that he could have done without someone recognizing his style. And this is the thing that complicates it for me, is that I can't see Richey just disappearing into obscurity like that and just I can't see it. But if you've got theories, I would love to hear them. Do you think there is an author of maybe philosophy or poetry or kind of political rantings that reads a little bit like Richey's style? Have you read that kind of thing? Because I don't honestly read that type of book particularly. But those of you who do you think you may have read something that might be a secret Richey manuscript? Because that intrigues me. Otherwise, do you have theories about where he went? Do you think he's dead or alive? Do you think there's an interesting story? Do you have more pieces of evidence that actually I have not unearthed or I've completely forgotten in the telling of this story? Anna, yeah, were you a little Manics kid too? I still have the only one of my Manic Street Preachers spray paint t-shirts that didn't get thrown out. Actually, I have two. I have one that says "Stay Beautiful," and the other one that's actually an exploited lyric instead, and it's got "Chicken shit conformists fuck off" spray painted on the back. Is the most childish lyric in the world to have spray painted on the back of your t-shirt, but I had to keep it for pure nostalgia. Yeah, do you still have your Manic Street Preachers clothing and stuff like that from the 90s? If so, it might be fun to fling them up on Instagram and show me. And if you've never gotten into them at all or never really heard them, I totally recommend checking out Generation Terrorists as an album, and I totally recommend the Holy Bible. When I first got into the Manics, I bought those two albums together, and it was a head-spinning couple nights. The first 2 nights I was listening to those two together. You've got these two albums and you just see, oh my God, this is how they started, this is where it went, and then he either died or went on the run, and oh my God, this is just tragic. So that was how I first listened to them, was Generation Terrorist, Holy Bible, back to back over a couple of nights. And oh man, it was such a head-spinningly dark experience that, me being me, I was like hooked on this band forever. So yeah. So that's everything that I wanted to waffle about. This is a huge tangential video now, so I'm going to do a shut up. But if you have anything to add, please plop it below. And I'm so sorry that YouTube, with its fucking rules about monetization, would not let me play snippets of the Manics throughout this video, because it would have been so much cooler. But anyway, they're on YouTube. Go and check them out. Maybe I'll leave some links in the drop down with the lyrics and stuff. I don't know. So anyway, with all of that said, I'm going to shut up. So thanks for tolerating me for this long. Over and out. Bye bye.